from a risk point of view, but we could actually drive inclusive growth because more countries could participate. There may be a way to think about that.
I think that makes sense, and that will also mean more manufacturing in countries today that are not leading in manufacturing. But as you said, if you get 80% of semiconductors from one or two countries, or minerals and etc. Rania Al-Mashaat, Minister from Egypt, you were critical at heading and chairing the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, and I guess you reflected on the meeting also afterwards. We got loss and damage for the first time into the agreement, but I think we're all seeing that we are very vulnerable when it comes to climate change. It's not anymore about why, but how, and how much do we need to invest in the years to come on mitigation, but also adaptation, because it's really happening there. And I think in Egypt, you also feel climate change every day with water challenges, but also the impact it has on agricultural production.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to be part of the group and the consortium. A few points to make, and I love the way it's phrased. It's not a cost, it's an investment. Because if you don't invest into resilience, you move into loss and damage. So that's the way, if I'm putting it in a COP context, if we're not investing enough in adaptation projects, if we're not investing enough in private sector, if the government is not doing enough policy to increase resilience, then we're going to be in a situation where we're trying to find money as quickly as possible, increasing the debt to be able to avoid a loss and damage situation. A few important points reflecting on COP and this concept of resilience. If countries are not very aware that today, if you are trying to invite investors, if you're trying to finance your own sovereign projects, financing is very difficult if it doesn't have climate action embedded somewhere. And therefore, the argument that we were making to increase resilience in general is that climate action and development should not be seen as mutually exclusive. They come hand in hand, and it comes hand in hand because we've seen over the years that if we don't do that, the implications not just on a national level but on a global level are quite big. So if we take a look at the report, and I invite everyone to take a look at it, it's split maybe into increasing resilience on the social level, because there are people that are affected. If we're looking at health, if we're looking at education, if the cost is going up so much, then you're eating from a pool of resources, and those that are affected most are the sectors which are supposed to increase your resilience. So that's an important point. There's a social aspect. The other aspect is related to inclusivity and SDGs, and therefore this point about growth, and then finally the financing. So again, if these are the 3 points that the report come out and explicitly identify, very, very important. And the other point is it's not just a government being resilient without the private sector being resilient. It's really a collective, because at the end of the day, we've seen that crises, when they happen, if it's a financial crisis, it affects everyone. If it's a crisis where the private sector and banks are involved, then again, it affects growth and it affects governments and so forth. So our message from COP was climate and development should be seen hand in hand. When governments today are putting out development projects which include private-public partnerships or try to catalyze private sector and so forth, we need to be very, very clear on on the national level what the NDCs are, but also make sure that the private sector is aware of the goals and the plans, and that all of us are working together. And of course, hyper collaboration. Again, crisis in and crisis out. It's shown that without international cooperation, and WEF is the fantastic forum for that, it would be very difficult to meet the common problems that we are all facing and increase our resilience.
Thank you, Ms. Rania. I go to Haldun Al-Mubarak. You heard Ms. Rania was saying that it's not only a cost, but it's an investment in resilience. So how do you think you're one of the large investors in the world, but also UAE in general. I know you play a critical role there. How do you think about resilience? Because it's also about optimizing the investments. Because we know from government that you could invest that so much there is no money left. But I think we're more conscious about this resilience piece now than we were in the past.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the UAE, you know it very well, is a country that is all about resilience. Our history, our 50-plus year history, for many of you who have been there, and for someone that have lived through most of it, you would have seen a country that I think was completely underdeveloped in every way 50-odd years ago, and now is considered one of the most developed countries in the world. And it's by investing in the long term, investing in the infrastructure, both human and physical. And that creates that resilience. Yes, I think we were blessed with natural resources, but it was also about diversification. You know, consistently over the last 40 years, a consistent investment into diversification of the economy and the development of the country. I think that's worked very well for us. The last couple of years, I think, have been pretty remarkable in many ways, not necessarily all good for the world, for all of us here in this room, in terms of the black swan events that we dealt with over the last 3 years. A couple of them, which, you know, each one of them, I think we all know, in its own self, is you know, incredibly challenging, and I think put that resilience reality to the core of every business, every country, every economy. You know, everybody in this room would have been impacted in some way or another by these black swan events over the last 3 years. Now, what that took us into is a shift from what was predominantly a cost-driven approach in the past. That cost-driven approach led to energy policy in some places where you had dependence over 80% on one supplier, where you had production of one particular commodity, or let's call it commodity semiconductors, in one country. And these things were not looked at within the resilience lens because it was completely cost-driven. So what the last 3 years have taught us all is it cannot be that way. There has to be, in addition to the cost, a resilience aspect, a diversification aspect, which is critical. Now, the challenge is we can't also go too far down that road where also cost is important, and we all know that, and it cannot be, to Bob's point, then resilience at the cost of cost, where then it becomes an impediment for growth in whatever sector or whatever economy it is. I think the challenge we all deal with today is, particularly with the last 3 years, particularly with this divide, the push towards decoupling, deglobalization, these are very, very challenging headwinds. And I think from our perspective here, I would say a UAE perspective, a Mubadala perspective as an investor, my personal view on this, that's also a problem. Because yes, we have to have a resilience aspect of it. We have to have diversification. We have to have sensible views when it comes to global supply chains. But also, decoupling is not necessarily the answer, because the problem that creates is also quite substantial for all of us moving forward. Not having this gathering, WEF, for the last 3 years was a problem. I mean, yes, we had virtual meetings, yes, but look at us here. We're all back here now. You're seeing people from all over the world, east, west, north, south. This sort of grouping brings us back together, brings us back towards communicating. And I think that's fundamental. And I see, in a very cautiously optimistic way, the future as we come back together, as we communicate back again, how we have to now create the new way. And it's not deglobalization, it's not necessarily globalization in the way we knew it in the past. There is a new way.
A re-globalization, or a different kind of globalization. As you mentioned also, I think there is a big difference of diversification and decoupling. We heard Vice Premier of China yesterday also underlining the importance of trade and investments and reforms. And if we look at the decoupling, I think that will then apply for maybe 10% of the trade. Maybe there are areas of national security and etc. But still there will be a possibility to trade with 90% of the goods, I guess.
Absolutely. I think there's no question that as long as we, that there's a fence that defines what is justifiably positioned as a decoupled space, whatever it is, whatever sector. Let's say semiconductors as an example. Fine, I think that gets put in, and there's guardrails within that. But then the remaining pie, the remaining 90%, 85%, 95% maybe, I don't know what the number is, that has to be, in my view, released in a appropriate way. The challenge is when you have a cloud, it affects the whole. So let's look at the last quarter, the last 2 quarters. I think I was, in the last 2 days I've been speaking to a lot of people. We had a wave of negativity in the last 3rd and 4th quarter. This year it was going to be a disaster. And that, you heard it in the media, you heard it from politicians, you heard it from government, you heard it from everyone. Yet, I think all of us, I mean, I won't be presumptuous, but I'll speak of myself, you look at the data, and it's telling you a different story. But you can't help but be influenced by this, wave you're hearing from, on the screen, in meetings, government, and then you pause. That pause, I think, is what hit us in that last quarter last year. Now, I think you see it today, I think, at WEF, you don't hear that. People are starting to now go back to data, go back to the fundamentals. And, I'm not saying it's going to be great or it's going to be a bad year, but it's certainly not as bad as we thought it was because of that. And I think that's the same argument goes to the decoupling, because I think that wave that is, or that cloud is very much there until we have that clarity.
And I think you're right that when we meet, it's also easier to address those things also between nations. And what we are seeing now is a little bit more of a picture of silver linings. I think growth will be back in China in a major way late 2023. And the one region that was almost written off was Europe. Europe was going to be in a total energy crisis. People were concerned if they could come to Davos, but because there was no heating here. And industry production was going to deep dive. And last quarter, industry production increased in Germany. And we're also seeing that Europe is diversifying very fast. So, Commissioner, I guess there are still, Commissioner Gabriel, some challenges ahead for Europe. And where would you say that Europe now, with learning from building on Russian gas, U.S. security and Chinese export, I guess there's a little bit discussions now on how to build stronger resilience moving forward?
Well, first, I think that what was clear the last few months is there is strategic sectors from supply chains, technology, health, agriculture, transport, and there is strategic challenges. Investment, again, when we talk about talents. What I would like to raise is the importance of innovation and education, because I think that the first strong message that Europe sent is really to stay united. And that's actually, for me, a real challenge, to stay united not only between member states within Europe, but with our international partners and allies, and to build these strong partnerships between different governments and countries, partnerships between public and private sector, and many other partnerships. We have to innovate in this ecosystem approach that we have to adopt because we would like to have this resilience. There is a lot of key elements to take into consideration. The second thing, that's what we are doing, and maybe that explains a little bit these good numbers, is that we are looking very much now on the new wave of innovation. Actually, we are witnessing a new wave of innovation, the so-called deep tech innovation. And for us, deep, that means deepest societal challenges. That means that the world of science and industry, together with education and talents, is working with the regulators since the very beginning in order to offer solutions that are adequate to the needs of our citizens. It was good. Thanks to the digitalization, we increased the productivity, but it's not sufficient anymore. We need new products that will tackle these challenges. And what is good is that the companies that are in the deep tech, 94% of them are answering to sustainable development goals. It's really impressive. And we have another good example. Take the mRNA vaccine, a startup working with a big industry company, with the regulator really to accelerate the procedures and to continue to invest in building an ecosystem, connect the local innovation ecosystems, and have talented and skills. So for me, that's the main challenge now, really to see the investment in education not as a cost, but as a real investment, because behind all these good companies, good innovation, brilliant examples, we have brilliant people with the necessary skills and competencies. And so on the other side, yes, to innovate and to see the innovation itself, not just to produce technologies or prototypes, but to see how they can build this resilience, how they contribute, really not to exclude someone, but not to left anyone behind. And that's for me the main message.
But investing, for example, in education and R&D, that's, you're saying, a part of future success. We heard that President von der Leyen yesterday was pretty tough when it came to the IRA, this Inflationary Reduction Act. I think there are huge investments. I'm not sure if the act is going to reduce inflation, but it's huge investments in semiconductors, decarbonization, and innovation. What is Europe's answer to this? Is it like saying that there's state subsidies, or are you just pulling the same kind of money together and say we'll do as well as the US for those that want to be in these sectors?
Well, definitely diversification will be the key word, because there is no miracle solution. Yes, of course, if we have stated rules in our hands, we have to see how we can adapt them. But there was another big announcement, that was the Net Zero Industry Act, and that's the clean tech. And clean tech, it's an example of this deep tech wave of innovation, where we have facts, it's a evidence-based policy, and where we have to build on this trend. What is different, again, for me, is to build different partnerships. What I think that it's, if you'd like to succeed, not just to be opposed to any other decision, that's the right of everyone to take decisions. What we should stop to do is to lose time only to oppose to each other. No, let's see what are our respective strengths and what we can do in order to bring solutions to the problems of people. And that's why we need to change the approach. That's why I'm always saying from co-creation to co-implementation. We need for these new solutions to co-create the solutions together with the stakeholders, not only public institutions, not only governments, but together with universities, with innovators, with startups, with public and private investors, and after to co-implement those solutions together in order to see very rapidly if there is a need to adapt, to be flexible, and to identify tendencies much more rapidly, not to discover 5-10 years later that there is concentration or there is lagging behind. So that's for me a strength. Of course, there is a momentum to seize, and I think that with the announcement of the President, Europe will be there to seize the momentum.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting to listen to Minister Habeck, the Minister for Economy and also Energy from Germany yesterday, saying that it was a cardinal mistake, of course, of Germany. He said it, to decide that 40% of the natural gas was coming from one country, and that so much also was based on export to China, has to diversify, and then he said, I can't put all the eggs in the basket of Washington, D.C. when it comes to security either. But anyway, coming to you, Robin Wins, there's no one better than banks to identify, at least that's what we hope, identify risks, mitigate them, and also build resilience. And I think we've seen through this economic downturn too that the banks are much more robust than they were in 2007, 2008. So what are your reflections on risk and resilience and the optimizing of this?
Sure, Borge. Look, it's a very important topic, and I actually want to come back to something that both Rania and Bob said earlier on when we were talking about the concept of resilience and is it a cost or is it an investment. We keep it kind of simple in our company, and I think this applies across the financial sector more broadly. Resilience is commercial. Being resilient is a commercial endeavor, and you alluded to it with the question, which is economies around the world rely on the financial sector to be resilient, to be able to weather downturns in the general state of the economy. You alluded to all of the work that's been done since the financial crisis, and that's right. Just the US G-SIBs alone, that's the 8 biggest banking institutions just in the US, added $500 billion worth of capital to their balance sheets since the financial crisis as an investment in resilience and ensuring that in whatever it is that happens next, and one can't predict whatever it is that's going to happen next, they will be able to weather those storms. And I think collectively the financial services industry around the world feels very proud of having managed through what was an incredibly disruptive event through the global pandemic, when all of the business as usual that we all depend on, the fact that the cash machines continue to work, the fact that our debit cards and credit cards can still tap on consoles, the fact that we can transition to being more online purchases. In our case, BNY Mellon, we settle every day between 10 and $15 trillion worth of US treasuries as part of our role in helping the US government to be able to conduct its own operations. We touch about 20% of all investable assets in the world. We're the world's largest custodian, $44 trillion worth of assets that we have on our custody platform. If resilience isn't commercial for us, then we're obviously missing a trick. And so then the question becomes, okay, how do you become resilient? And it's all the things that everybody's been talking about. We need diversification. We can't have all of our eggs in one basket. We can't service our business out of one place. We have to be globally distributed. We have to be regionally distributed. We have to have a variety of different technology infrastructure so that we're not dependent on a place, that we can render our business out and distribute it to wherever our customers may be. So there's a lot of work that goes into it, there's a lot of investment that goes into it, but at the end of the day, it is commercial and it's wrapped up in brands and trust that we can actually rely on sectors to perform through thick and thin.
Well, thank you. And even if the banks now are showing a little bit not as good results as in the past, you're saying that they're much better prepared for also taking hits. I think we're all also wondering about how is the economic outlook for 2023. Are we going to see like also a recession in the US? Will that be a very shallow one? What could we do today to avoid this possible recession? And this is where I would like to also hear you telling us a bit more of what tools do we have in our toolkit. We see that inflation is going down in the US now, but I think we still can expect the Fed to continue increasing interest rates because you have an inflationary target of 2%. That was maybe possible when China was exporting deflation every year, but things have changed.
So maybe I separate the comments into two things, and sort of where are we now and what might we expect potentially, but then let me just talk about the other part of your question, which is the investment and the preparedness. I think as a large financial institution, but this applies to any walk of life, you just don't know exactly what the future has in store. Anybody who is arrogant enough to think that they know the answer about how the world's going to unfold in the next 12 months, we have to worry a little bit about them. And so the consequence of that is to say, well, we don't know, but we have to be prepared for different eventualities. And that, to me, is the heart of what risk management is. I worked for somebody once who had an expression they used to use, which was, we have a great crystal ball, but it only works for the present. And it's a great insight into where we are at this moment in time, and I think that's instructive. And so as a financial institution, what we do, and I know other financial institutions do the same thing, we're preparing for all of these things. Maybe we'll have a terrible recession, maybe we won't have a recession at all, maybe the Fed will be hiking rates all year, maybe they'll start cutting rates at the end of the year, but it doesn't really matter which path it's on in terms of our ability to be prepared. We have to be prepared for all reasonable and plausible consequences. And I think that's the heart of a good risk management mindset, which is don't try to predict, but prepare for all of those different possibilities. Now, having said all of that, what do we actually see, which was the other part of your question? Well, we touch 20% of the world's investable assets, and through that we get insight, again, not about what's going to happen, but what has been happening now. And when we look at our own data, we certainly see that some of the forces that were driving the dollar to the strength that we saw in 22, some of those have abated. Again, it's not a prediction for the future, but it's a comment about where things stand today. We've also seen some of the very aggressive shorting of the US equity market abate. Again, not a prediction, but an observation. And we've also seen less investment in sort of buying in the long end of some of the debt markets, particularly in the US. Our own economists suggest that while everything is going to be data dependent in the US, there's certainly a possibility that we could maybe see a little bit more from the Fed than is currently priced into the market. That possibility of getting all the way to 5%, maybe it's even possible we could go beyond in Fed funds rates. And also the possibility that we'll stay there for a little bit longer. The market currently prices that the Fed will be cutting rates again by the end of 2023. Certainly possible. There are sets of data that could lead that to be the outcome, but we think that's less likely as a base case scenario, given the importance of combating inflation, given the importance of making sure that we really do deal with that once and for all. And once the Fed starts cutting, it's hard to turn around.
Thank you for that very thoughtful answer, and also about this. It's hard to predict, but you can prepare, and I think that's a lesson learned. Turning back to you, Bob, you listened. I think this discussion has brought up a lot of very important points. I think it was Robin also saying that resilience has to be commercial. I think that's a good point, but also this is about predicting. I remember when I started my economic studies, the professor Asa Lindbeck saying that economics is not an exact science. So if you bring 5 economists in the same room, there's probably 8 different opinions. So I think this also proves that we have to be prepared. But looking at this, resilience is being commercial, and that you have to be prepared. If you, as McKinsey, that do deal with a lot of the global companies, would you be able to share any areas where you see blind spots, where we are weaker than we should be commercially when it comes to being resilient?
I think it's a great question, and I might link...
And you give that advice for free here, too.
Yeah, exactly.
As an appetizer.
Exactly. You get what you pay for.
That's a good one.
I'd maybe link, Robin, where you were going, Haldun, some of the things that you said. And, part of this is, I think any organization is stepping back and saying, look, I need to stress test a much wider array of scenarios going forward than I ever did before. And am I missing something, right? This notion of rather, am I going to be certain, but let me actually widen the aperture. Let me widen the aperture around geopolitics, around where global growth will come from, around how fast we hit our climate goals, around talent shortages. And so I think one of the muscles that I see enterprise starting to build is a wider capability to look at a set of scenarios that were inconceivable a couple of years ago. And I think that's prudent. And I think that goes to your notion of plan versus predict, and are we ready to adapt? But I would link it with, if we stop at planning, nothing's going to happen. And I go to Haldun, one of the observations you made. One of the things that I'm picking up is I think 2023 is a year of getting stuff done. Despite all these disruptions, I need to make decisions as a leader. And I need to make some decisions that some can be reversed, some are irreversible, but based on the data that I'm seeing, am I actually starting to act? And one thought for me is if we start to do that, we may change some of the answers to how the world could actually play out. I think interest rates are a key component to the equation, but we also know that a large chunk of this inflation was driven by supply disruptions. Right? Supply disruptions will be driven largely through capital investment made by the private sector. And if we then come together to say, look, let's start making some decisions and move, even under uncertainty against a wider range of scenarios, we may end up having some positive outcomes that could actually come through this year.
Haldun, looking at the risks and where we are prepared and not so prepared, any thoughts on that?
So there's one, maybe I'll completely take us out of the box here. So what we're
Sorry
seeing...
to put you on the spot.
No. But, I want to throw something that maybe controversial. So what's
like
happening
that.
in OpenAI right now is incredible. Now, you can look at it from a risk lens, or you can look at it from an opportunity lens. Since you're asking about risk, let's look at it from a risk lens. This is a revolution that's now just about to, I think, kickstart. I don't know what impact that's going to have on industries, businesses, sectors. I mean, you can certainly see the possibilities and the potential of disruption as quite significant. And that is a risk, and I'll answer the question in the risk lens, that I don't think, from my perspective, I have a clear view on. And when I look at our investments, when I look at our portfolios, when I look at our industries that we're in, the impact of this AI revolution that it's going to have now at a pace that in my view is going to be coming now fast and furious. Are we ready for it? What businesses are ready for it? How are they going to adapt? How are they going to pivot? How are they going to take advantage of it? And of course, what are the ones that are not going to be able to deal with it? And what does that mean? What does that mean, and what does that mean for us from a portfolio allocation, from a deployed capital perspective? How do we exit these industries, these sectors that we're going to have to take a view on right now? If we had had this discussion a year ago, I would have told you, no, we're still away from that conversation or that discussion. I think now, no. I think it's here. It's now, and I think we have to really look at that from both a risk and an opportunity lens.
I agree, and I think what we're seeing between the G2 is China and US is a race for those new technologies. They do understand that those that are on top of it will also be most influential. I'll come back to you, Rania, on this, but I also, Commissioner, I know you care a lot about this and AI, and how is the European Union prepared for this, because it's a risk, but it's also a huge opportunity for those that succeed. But for developing countries in a platform economy where the winner takes it all, it raises also some problems. So we have 4 minutes. So 1 minute, 1 minute, and then we'll close at the end here.
Well, very briefly, maybe for this question, how to be better prepared. Of course, we can't predict everything. Maybe a little bit provocative thought, but we need to continue to invest much more in fundamental research. Because we talk about companies, citizens, sectors, investors, but without the fundamental research, it will be impossible to be better prepared in future
But will the
situation.
EU do that? Because you're lagging
Yes.
behind the Chinese.
We have the
and
European
Americans.
Research Council. I think that it's our Nobel Prize factory, and we are very, very proud. So now there is a lot of other challenges, but it's really important to continue to invest in research. The second, it's really to bring closer these worlds of research, innovation, and education to industry. It's something that it's not obvious. We don't think spontaneously to each other, but suddenly we discover that we can provide concrete benefits in concrete situations in order to be more resilient. And finally, let's tackle much more the fragmentation of the regional innovation valleys. Everywhere, in all our continents, not only within the European Union, we have vibrant local innovation ecosystems. they are not connected to each other. If you'd like to be better prepared and to anticipate, and not only to talk about supply chains and dependency, short or long, we need to tackle this issue.
Rania, I guess the new technologies, and I know you worked a lot on this, could be a way of leapfrogging for developing countries. But still, we know that 3.6 billion people are not really connected to state-of-the-world internet. So what are your reflections? How can Egypt leapfrog in such a situation? Is it possible?
I want to say that, thank you, Khadoun, for bringing this as a big opportunity/risk, because I think the AI is going to redefine how we think about countries, correct? I mean, it's not just going to be about growth, it's not just going to be about natural resources, it's going to be about how fast the population, who's going to be running all of this. So I think there's going to be a reshaping of the economic landscape based on exactly this. Is it going to be a knowledge economy? Is it going to be, we used to talk about just services, now it's taking it to a different level. And I just want to conclude with one thought, also reflecting on the discussion. Predicting, preparing, but also not controlling, anchoring perceptions. Because I think that we used to talk in the past as economists about sunspots and creating the sunspots, and actually, you know, you see the disaster materializes because everybody's expecting it. So how can we reduce information gaps, anchor expectations more, and perceptions, so that we don't fall into more risks? And I think that happens by making sure that everything is more resilient. Take food security, for instance. If people believed that countries and private sector in their investments were more resilient against food shocks, maybe the extra premium on prices would not have been materialized because of the perceptions. So I think that's you know, importance of anchoring expectations through investing in resilience.
Thank you, Rania. Robin, of course, for your industry, the artificial intelligence can change a lot of things. Maybe comment on that. And the second thing is that a lot of the risks are, we cannot really predict, as you said. Who would have thought that thousands of people were storming the capital the 6th of January? Who would have thought that Russia would try to invade a country where they have never disputed the border? So there's a lot of uncertainties also in the future that we will have to be resilient, but we can't exactly know what is happening. So your last reflections on those two things.
So first, just on the artificial intelligence. So look, this is not, it's a very, very powerful capability, and I think it's very exciting. It certainly has risks. It's not native intelligence, of course. Ultimately,